They laughed before she even finished her sentence. A black schoolgirl, standing alone at the back of a university hall, claiming she could solve a problem that had humiliated professors for decades, a problem that had destroyed reputations and divided experts worldwide. Some smiled politely, others didn't bother hiding their disbelief. To them, she wasn't a genius, she was an interruption, a child who didn't know her place. But as the equations appeared on the board, something shifted. The laughter faded, pens stopped moving, and one by one the professors realized this was no joke. What happened next would expose more than just the truth. Amara Lewis had learned early that intelligence did not protect you from being underestimated. In her neighborhood, brilliance was treated like a rumor, interesting, but rarely believed. Her school didn't have advanced labs or famous alumni. It had outdated textbooks, overcrowded classrooms, and teachers stretched thin by a system that expected little from students like her. Yet, Amara saw patterns where others saw limits. Numbers spoke to her in quiet, persistent ways. Late at night, while her mother scrubbed hospital floors and her father drove empty buses through sleeping streets, Amara filled notebooks with symbols she barely understood the names of, only the logic behind them. Her teachers noticed her ability, but not enough to challenge the system around her. Opportunities came rarely, and when they did, they came with invisible walls. So when a local university announced an open academic symposium, a space where scholars would debate an unsolved theoretical problem that had lingered for decades, no one expected Amara to attend. She wasn't invited. She wasn't encouraged, she simply showed up. Wearing a uniform that had been washed too many times, she sat quietly among professors, graduate students, and researchers who carried titles heavier than her entire future. Chalkboards were covered in equations that represented years of failure, disagreement, and stalled progress. This was not a place built for someone like her, and everyone in the room seemed to know it. But Amara hadn't come to impress anyone. She had come because she believed quietly, stubbornly, that she understood something they didn't. The atmosphere in the hall was polite but cold. Academic respect wrapped tightly around hierarchy. Credentials mattered more than ideas, and Amara had none that anyone recognized. As the discussion dragged on, familiar arguments resurfaced. Professors referenced old papers, dismissed rival theories, circled the same dead ends that had consumed careers. The problem remained untouched, a monument to intellectual pride. Amara listened carefully. She recognized the structure of the arguments, the assumptions repeated so often they had become invisible. In her notebooks, she had questioned those assumptions for years, not out of rebellion, but curiosity. Eventually, during an open moment meant for questions, Amara raised her hand. The movement alone felt disruptive. Eyes turned, some curious, most skeptical, a few clearly irritated. The contrast was unmistakable, a black schoolgirl surrounded by people who had spent decades being listened to. When she stood, the room shifted. There was no hostility in her posture, no arrogance in her expression, only calm certainty. She explained briefly that she believed the problem was being approached from the wrong foundation, that a key premise everyone accepted might be the very thing blocking progress. The response was immediate, not outraged dismissal. A soft ripple of laughter, tight smiles, raised eyebrows exchanged between experts who didn't need to say what they were thinking. It was the kind of reaction designed to humiliate without appearing cruel. This wasn't skepticism of an idea. It was disbelief in a person. Amara felt the familiar weight press down the silent judgment that said she was out of place, out of depth, out of her league. The kind of judgment that black girls learn to recognize long before they learn to name it. Yet she continued. She outlined her reasoning, step by step, pointing not to her intelligence, but to the logic itself. She spoke slowly, deliberately, as if inviting the room to follow, not to believe her, but to think with her. That was when the tension sharpened. Some professors leaned back, arms crossed. Others stared intensely, no longer amused. The room divided quietly between those waiting for her to fail and those unsure of what they were witnessing. This was no longer about mathematics. It was about who was allowed to be right. Amara walked to the board. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the pressure of knowing that every assumption about her rested on what came next. She began writing, not hurried, not uncertain, each symbol placed with intention, each step built on the last with unsettling clarity. The equations didn't explode into brilliance, they unfolded, patiently dismantling decades of circular reasoning. The laughter stopped, the room grew still, and for the first time the problem looked vulnerable. As Amara reached the final sequence, something extraordinary happened, not dramatically, but unmistakably. A senior professor stood up, not to interrupt, to see better. Another followed, then another. The air shifted from skepticism to disbelief, from disbelief to recognition. Pens stopped moving, phones lowered. No one spoke. The equations on the board did what no argument ever had: they resolved, not partially, not hypothetically, but cleanly. The decades-old debate collapsed into silence, replaced by a truth so simple it was almost humiliating that no one had seen it before. Amara stepped back. She didn't smile. She didn't wait for approval. She simply stood there, breathing, as if she had done nothing more than finish a thought. The silence stretched. In that silence lived something heavier than praise, an unspoken reckoning. A realization that brilliance had been standing at the margins for years, unheard, not because it was flawed, but because of who carried it. This was not just an academic moment. It was an exposure of bias, of exclusion, of how many voices had been dismissed before they were ever understood. Finally, a professor spoke, not with authority, but humility. The solution held, the logic was sound, the implications were profound. And the room, once filled with quiet laughter, now stood frozen in respect. Amara hadn't just solved a problem, she had shattered a belief. The story spread quickly, not because Amara sought attention, but because the truth demanded space. Journals requested reviews, universities offered scholarships, researchers asked how she had seen what they had missed, but the most powerful shift happened quietly. In classrooms like the one Amara came from, teachers began looking twice, listening longer, questioning their own assumptions. Somewhere, another child stopped shrinking their intelligence to fit the room. Amara never claimed to be a symbol. She didn't frame her success as extraordinary. To her, it was simply the result of being allowed finally to finish a sentence. Her journey reminded the world of something uncomfortable but necessary. Talent is everywhere. Opportunity is not. When society decides who looks like a genius, it doesn't just exclude people, it delays progress. It locks solutions behind prejudice and calls it tradition. Amara's story wasn't about humiliation or revenge. It was about dignity, about the cost of ignoring voices that don't fit expectations, about the brilliance that waits quietly, patiently, until someone stops laughing long enough to listen. And the next time a room fills with doubt because of who is standing at the back, her story lingers, asking a simple question: what truth are we missing? Because of who we refuse to hear. Never underestimate a voice just because the world taught you not to listen. Subscribe for more powerful stories.